see if I go to your channel. Oh, I see multi-stream. Yeah, there it is. Okay.
Yeah, is it showing the that was the wrong stream. It's supposed to be the other one. Ah, come on. I really don't like the YouTube UI. Okay. Where are my existing streams? This thing's really annoying. Okay. Move all this shit out the way.
Oh, you already had a comment. Hey, hello. I am new to your channel.
Hopefully we can get this. Get it going. Okay, latest upload. No. Let's try stream again. How do I go to my streams? Videos. Did it kill my live stream? No, it says it's live. Nice.
It's got a hair trigger.
Yeah, I don't know how to reopen the thinking the editor, the live streaming editor.
Totally live. Hello, people, if you're seeing us right now. What is the difference between Visual Studio and Xamarin Studio? Oh, we can see and hear you, Gordon Arbor says. Sounds good.
Awesome. Okay, well, I guess we'll get started then. Well, let me make sure. Yeah, is everything live? Oh, okay.
Yeah, I guess I'll go live too.
If it's live and working, then perfect. I didn't think it had actually worked. Looks like it kicked it off.
It's looking pretty good.
Sweet. Hello, everybody. Yeah, that was totally unexpected. Anyway, trying to figure out how to stream with two things to two channels. Started then. Well, let me make sure. Oh, yeah, is everything live? I got to mute myself so I don't hear me talking. There we go. Okay, cool. Anyway, yeah, we're streaming to both channels. I'm gonna link Charles's channel in chat too. The description is all wrong. It copied my description from the previous channel. So yeah, we were gonna talk about clean code, architecture, solid principles, and just answer questions and stuff. Give me 30 seconds to link Charles's channel though in the description because that's not. I had all the wrong stuff in there.
This is my first stream, so let me see if I can. I'm learning this thing here, so I'm gonna send this out to my Discord folks. Let them know I'm doing this.
All right, I just linked it in the description below too. So yeah, we're just gonna take questions, talk about clean code stuff, and that's about it. Just stuff that we're both interested in, and we just thought it'd be fun to just chat and talk together and do a stream together. So if you've got questions, drop them in the chat, and somehow I'm gonna figure out how to open up the stream thing and see what the questions are.
Come through.
Yeah, I just I lost my window for it, so I gotta figure out how to get the live stream window, editing window back, like the monitoring window. I'm not sure where that is.
Get some nice. Hey, Mert, thanks, and D3 generative. Appreciate it. Appreciate the love there.
So how do we? Do you know how to get back to that thing? The live view of your streams.
Yeah, if you go to your the studio beta, and then I think if you go to videos, and then at the top, if you hit live.
Okay, so I can do. Okay, I got. Oh, that's right. And then is it the little drop down in there? Yeah, that's right. The options drop down has a no. How do I get to the management thing of that?
Yeah, it's like a management thing. Yeah.
Oh, view live control room. There it is. It's that little button that looks like a circle, and then the thingy is going out. Okay, cool. So now I can pull the control room over. I can actually see the questions, and we can maybe answer stuff, and people can hop on. Oh, it says that our video resolution is too high. Hopefully that's okay. I don't know. I'm streaming at 4K. I don't know. We'll see.
I sound a bit not much loud. Do I need to turn up my microphone?
You might need to.
Charles at all? I'm gonna turn up my. Am I loud?
You're very loud. Let me turn you up. It might just be on my end that you're not loud enough.
We'll get the hang of this.
Yeah. Sorry, everybody. Just kind of getting this all figured out. If I put on headphones, actually, that's probably gonna make things worse. I don't know.
I also have some echo here.
Okay. Well, can anybody hear Charles?
Hey guys, can you hear me? I'll try to answer a question. I saw one about Xamarin versus Visual Studio, I think, at the top. Xamarin is a mobile framework. Charles sounds like he's coming through another mic. Xamarin is a mobile framework, so it's kind of different. I think Xamarin has its own IDE, but they're kind of two different things. Visual Studio is a code editor, and Xamarin is just a framework for creating mobile devices. Oh, Xamarin Studio. Yeah, Xamarin Studio is just basically focused. It's like Visual Studio, but it's focused on creating Xamarin applications. Whereas Visual Studio, you can create a Xamarin application inside of Visual Studio, but you can't create a normal .NET application in Xamarin Studio. Hopefully that answers your questions, Cherry, and hopefully you guys can hear me.
Yeah, I think I may have fixed your audio a little bit. I cranked you way up and just turned down my speaker, so you're not blasting me out. I just hope that nothing pops up randomly and gets really loud. We'll get it figured out better for the next one, though, for sure.
Yeah, this is pretty impromptu, but we figured, hey, why not? Let's go for it.
Seemed like something fun to do.
That's the best time. That's the best way to learn. You know, even in software development, sometimes you just got to throw yourself into the fire.
Have you used Xamarin Studio much, Charles?
I actually just started using it recently for work. You know what? I can't say I've used Xamarin Studio, but I've started developing Xamarin applications. I probably should check out Xamarin Studio, but I'm really stubborn. So I was trying to use Rider.
Oh,
but you should not use Rider to develop Xamarin applications.
Oh, interesting. That makes sense. I was say because I use Rider now for all of my Unity stuff. So whenever I'm building Unity games, it's all 100% in Rider.
Yes, it's great. It's freaking great for Unity.
Yeah, it's anybody that's not using it. If you haven't used it before, I did a video about why Rider's freaking awesome. But the main thing is that it's going to speed up your coding, and it gives a lot of really good tips on just how to write better code in general. So as you're looking through your code, it'll show you like tip after tip after tip, and it's just constantly recommending ways to improve your code that don't really require you to do too much. Like you just hit the button, it'll auto convert it, and when you want to understand why it did it, it actually gives you a link to a full document explaining why it's recommending that change, what the benefits are, which I think is one of the coolest parts, because it's easy to recommend a change and like not have people know what the point of it is. And there they actually explain it kind of in detail what the reason for it is. So I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, it's for those who have used ReSharper in Visual Studio, it's the same. I mean, it's created by the same company, and it's the same underlying IntelliSense engine powers both of those recommendations while you're coding. Yeah.
Let me look. I'm going to see if I got any questions here on my side too.
Cool.
Somebody was asking how to become an OOP thinker.
A lot of experience. You got to just throw yourself into it.
Yeah, and I think doing some samples, there are a lot of good examples that really relate OOP to like real objects, right? So you can kind of see like how you would create things. But part of the problem is that sometimes that doesn't really line up with how you would want to code either. But I don't know how to become a great OP thinker. I'm trying to think of that. I don't know. Other than trying a lot and doing some of those, but yeah, I don't know. I wish I had a good tip there. What do you got? You got anything else, Charles?
I mean, I think, it's just one of those things where, you just have to get the experience, and, like how do you become a great writer? You write. And I think it's the same thing with becoming an OOP thinker. You just need to put yourself into situations on a consistent basis where you're going to be developing, and you're going to be putting yourself into situations where you're going to need to make decisions about the code you're writing. And then you're going to make mistakes. And I think that's extremely important. You need to go in there, you make mistakes, and then that's where you're going to learn the most. And that's how you're going to develop, a toolbox of and a library of knowledge that's going to help you in the future.
Sounds about right to me. Just practicing. Hold on, let me turn off Skype real quick too.
I'm still trying to figure out my stream here. I think it's private. Oh, it's private. Darn it. That's the problem.
Oh, okay. Right, you want to make your streams public, Charles. It tends to help a little bit.
Hey, I'm just talking about coding here. I'm throwing myself into the fire, the pan here with my stream, and I'm learning.
All
How
right.
do you make it? How do you make it public?
And you just got to go onto the video, you go to your streams and then switch over or click on the edit mode. You can
Oh,
get in there and change it.
darn it! And I just shared it on my Discord server, like, "Hey, join the stream," and they're probably just gonna get a link that's like, "Dude,
No. All right.
yeah, I'm getting like eyeballs and stuff. I'm
So somebody mentioned they were never able to figure out how to get to the Unity manual from a method. That's in Rider. That's interesting. I thought it was just F1, but I guess I've never actually tried it. It's an interesting.
What was the question?
feedback.
Sorry.
He was saying that one thing that was interesting about Rider was that, or one thing that bugged him, I think, about Rider was that he couldn't get to the Unity manuals directly from a method. Where in Visual Studio, you hit F1 and it takes you directly to the dock. Yeah.
Oh, got you.
One thing I really like in Rider is when I hit F12 on a Unity method, it actually takes me into some of the code, and I can actually see some of the underlying C# code until it gets down to the C++ layer, which is
really
you
useful. Decompile it.
And somebody asked about any tips on writing modular code. Looks like that was Ian N. I got to start getting better at saying people's names too. I always forget about that. Like I read them and I'm like. So yeah, he was asking any tips on writing modular code. I have a lot of tips on that. Like, I don't know about you, Charles. Like my first one would just be start off making sure that your classes are small and that you're not writing big, giant monolithic things. So immediately look for options as soon as you see code getting over a couple hundred lines, like 200 lines. But really, you want to split it out towards a single responsibility principle is kind of the general simplest rule I would recommend, where you're just having code that and I used to say it against the way that Bob Martin says it. I used to have it only do one thing, but really his argument for it, which makes a lot of sense, is to have it only have one reason to change. So only one source of things would cause it to change. Like if you're changing the way that this thing works, that's the only reason that it should change. Like you shouldn't have to change your health script because you've added new stun functionality or something. It should be completely like the health script should only change if health calculations are changing, right? That's it. Stuff like that, and splitting them out, using a lot of components. I think at first I used a lot of Unity components, and I may have gone a little overboard on it, but I think it's good to split things out into a good number of Unity components that you add and kind of build things up on, kind of like we do in projects. But yeah, I'm curious what you think, Charles. What would you recommend for just modular code?
Yeah, I mean, just to play devil's advocate on the whole single responsibility notion. I when I first was just really getting into trying to write clean code, I was really an idealist, and I would just try to follow every rule to the T. But I think one thing that's a safe bet is the rule of three. And so the rule of three is if you repeat yourself, 1, 2 times, the third time is when you should try to refactor it into something that's generic. So, obviously, look, you gain experience and eventually you just kind of know what's going to need to be generic, what's going to be something like when a class is getting kind of too bloated. But I think that sometimes I almost force myself when I can't see the full picture of what I'm writing. I force myself to repeat it 2 times. And then the third time I say, okay, now I know that this is something that really does need to be modular and reusable. And not only do I know from a high level that it needs to be modular, but once you repeat something 3 times, you kind of get the idea of how it's expected to be used. And, it's kind of a generic, I don't really have a good example off the top of my head. Maybe I'll think of one, but if you are writing a class, like for instance, let's say you're writing like a health class, like a player health, and let's say you're thinking ahead and you're like, oh, well, what is health really? Well, maybe health is really just a gauge, and what's a gauge? It's a gauge, it has a maximum capacity and goes down to 0 and you fill it up. So then you start, formulating a class. It's a gauge. Look how modular and reusable that is. Well, then you start going down the rabbit hole, and you might start adding features and things that you may never even need. I'm extremely guilty of that one. I mean, I have over architected so much code in my career, only to find that most of it I would just toss out, or most of it I don't use.
Yep.
So these days, if I really don't know what it is the end product's going to be, I'll just say, listen, I'm going to break the dry rule. I'm just going to rewrite it 2-3 times. And then at the third time, I have a good idea. Hey, I still might write the gauge, but at least I know the scope of what that gauge is going to require to encapsulate, player health. So that was just one example. Hey, some folks are joining my stream here. Oh, I see. We got Jason's story here, a piece of fruit from the Discord server over on my side.
Oh,
hey, what's
cool.
up, guys?
Hey, you got to come to the meetup tomorrow, Jason. I'll talk to you about some stuff. And it's tomorrow in the morning, just so you can make it. Yeah, I like that advice a lot. The dry stuff especially, because I was thinking about it even just yesterday. I was writing a method, and I'm going in here, and I'm like, hey, I just repeated this chunk of code, and I had to fight the urge to turn that into a method, and I'm like, it's 3 lines. It's okay to copy it, it's okay to repeat it here. It's a fine balance, trying not to repeat too much and then ending up with a little bit of a mess.
Yeah. And if I'm being honest with myself, sometimes following these principles and sometimes genericizing things is a form of procrastination for me, because it's like, oh, I get to think about this one little thing, and how can I genericize this? How can I write this method? And maybe I'll put an interface and I'll make a generic here and there. And it's like I end up wasting so much time, but it feels good because it feels like I'm doing something, but I'm not really,
You're writing lots of code. It feels like you're building a thing. Yeah.
Yeah,
I
it
do the
really
same thing.
does.
You just find out, or you realize that, hey, I was building the wrong thing. I was building something useless, something that nobody needed, or that is just going to make my later work harder.
Yeah, for real.
Let me see if
I see a question on my side.
Go ahead.
Inheritance versus decoration. Which one do you guys prefer to achieve clean code in Unity?
Did it say decoration?
I guess the decoration pattern.
Oh, like decorator pattern? I don't really use that pattern at all, ever. I don't know if you do.
I can't think of an example. I mean, honestly, the whole thing with patterns is, you don't want to use the wrong tool for the wrong job. You don't want to grab a tool ahead of time. Jason story, a piece of fruit. He has a good analogy. I forgot what it's called, like a hammer for a screw or something like that. I mean, you don't want to put the cart before the horse. Just figure out what your problem is, and if the decorator pattern solves it, go ahead and use that. If the inheritance solves it, then use that, I would say.
But I think that goes to a bigger thing of inheritance versus composition, which I think is where there's a much bigger split, and it's easier to say where, at least I know where I would fall there. Like, I'm a much bigger fan of composition over inheritance now. I used to be completely opposite. I don't know. And 5-6 years ago, people started talking to me and convincing me that, hey, composition is generally better because here are all the pitfalls, here are the problems. And I'd seen the problems too. They just kind of called them out. Like, you end up with bloated base classes, and you end up breaking that single responsibility principle, because eventually the stuff keeps changing in those base classes, getting more and more complex and abstract. It turns into a mess, at least. That's been my experience.
I agree.
Go ahead.
No, I was gonna say I totally agree with you. Yeah, that you just get these bloated classes. And just another point, if you think about, I would imagine most people watching are Unity developers. I mean, you want to play to the strength of the framework or engine that you're working with, and I think that Unity heavily promotes composition. You think about how you create a game object, and there's components that you attach to it. It's sort of the same. You just kind of play to the strengths of the engine.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. Definitely, and it makes a lot of sense in Unity because you just make components. The engine's built that way for a reason, because developers have struggled with this problem forever. Right? We had inheritance and multiple inheritance in C++, and you get bugs, you get weird problems, and it gets harder as you scale things up to not use a composition model. Somebody asked your age. I assume they're asking you, because
let's see if you can guess.
Like just barely over 20.
See if you
And
can guess
somebody
my
else
age.
asked what your favorite language was other than C sharp. I'm curious because I don't really have one. Like I love C sharp and all the other languages are okay because I don't use them enough to
Ooh,
form an opinion. I'm
let me
curious
look it up.
if you have one.
Shoot, man, there's this language. Oh shoot, what is it called? Someone in the chat might know. There's like this MIT course. It's like from the 70s or 80s or something like that. That's completely free online, and they teach you this language, or they use a language to teach you programming in the course. And I always liked it. Oh, what is it? Is it Lisp? I always really liked it just because it made me feel really cool that I knew it, and that it was like an MIT course, and that's it. That's all.
Huh.
That's all. The only reason why I liked it.
Fair enough.
But I'm like super. What's the word? I'm like super bougie and arrogant when it comes to languages. I'm like, hey, listen, whatever language you need me to learn or do to complete the job, I'll learn it. I don't care. You know, I really like C sharp, by the way. I think that's probably my favorite language. But oh wow, a piece of fruits in both Jason's in both channels now on both chats. I'll learn any language. I don't have a particularly favorite one. I think it's Lisp is the one that I really like just because it made me feel super cool. But I really like C sharp.
Yeah, C sharp still my favorite by far. And I mean, most really like I've done C sharp, some other, lots of C++, a tiny bit of assembly, some Java, a little JavaScript, and a little PHP. Yeah. Oh, God. I remember that. But
I'll
yeah,
say
I mean,
I don't like PHP. That's probably my least favorite language.
I don't feel proficient in anything other than C sharp anymore. Yeah, PHP was scary stuff.
For my day job, I use a language called Groovy. It's basically built for the JVM and Java. But Groovy, Groovy is an interesting language because it's pretty much all syntactic sugar. I mean, you can do stupid one-liners that are completely unlegible, but they're like, it's cool. I mean, it's great. But what I've noticed is that C sharp now is adding a lot of syntactic sugar, and they handle it so much better than Groovy ever did. So when I first learned Groovy, I was like, wow, this is the coolest language ever. Look at all these crazy, they had like dynamic methods and things like that could just come up on the fly. You could write on the fly. But then C sharp comes along and they're adding all the syntactic sugar and it does it so much better.
Yeah. I like which stuff do you really like in the new C sharp? Like anything stand out?
I'll probably never use it, but I really like the things they're doing with like switches. They're doing some interesting switch return statements. I really like how when you do like a literal list, let's say you do a new list of type, and let's say you have a custom class player, you don't have to say new player for each one. You can just say new and then open and close parentheses, and it's just a constructor.
Yeah.
I don't know if I explained that well enough, but yeah.
No, I get what you're saying. When you're putting them in there and you're putting them with the brackets instead of newing, yeah, it speeds it up a lot. I like the expression body stuff a lot too.
Oh
expression body properties are so nice. Like
I love that.
It feels so much cleaner. Like you're just getting rid of all that extra garbage.
Jason really says string interpolation, and yeah, I love that string interpolation.
Yep.
I like all the stuff they're doing there.
Go up here. I think there were a couple other questions. I'm sure I missed some. Somebody asked they want to make games, but it was Cherry Vanilla. Said, I want to make games. What do I need to learn after C sharp language? Nothing after, I would say. I would say you should learn it together. You should learn Unity development and C sharp at the same time. Don't try to learn C sharp and then try to learn Unity stuff. Get right in. Oh, okay. And if you already know Unity, because he said he knows Unity too. I'm scrolling through and seeing the chat. Yeah, to learn them together and just start building games. And I don't know. I don't know. I've recommended this a million times, so maybe Charles has some other ideas. My recommendation is always just go out and build a lot of little 2-week games. Find a lot of things that you can build in 1 to 3 weeks. And if you think you can build it in 1 to 3 weeks, like cut that in half because you're going to be wrong. Right? Like scale it down to just the core piece of functionality. Go through tutorials and build those, and then expand on them a little bit. don't let them go longer than like 2 weeks maybe, and then go on to the next one and build a bunch of those. Get used to the process of starting them and finishing them. And it's just literally just intentional practice. You're going to get better at it. You're not going to sit there and struggle with any problem for too long and beat your head against the wall, and you're just going to keep improving. Now, I don't know. What do you got, Charles? What would you recommend people just getting started out?
Yeah, I mean, when I was first getting started out, I was working my day job, and that was great and all because you're given opportunities just to write code. But personally, the thing that like completely elevated my learning experience or sped it up, if that's, I know it's appealing, is to speed it up, was taking like freelance gigs, because when you have to do something like I took a gig where I did an app for Disney Annual Pass, which in Florida, Disney Annual Pass is its own company that's associated with Disney, and they had this activation where they had like this tent that would go all over Florida, and in that tent they would put like these kiosks that had a game on it, and I developed this game for that kiosk, and it was this dumb little thing. But working with that company, being a contractor for them, having deadlines, being in control of the entire pipeline of the application from, they gave me the specs, I wrote it out, got to the point where I deployed it. That was so stressful and hard, but it forced me to touch every aspect from soup to nuts. And that, was very educational, because it's like when you're sitting here, you're sitting in your home office or whatever the case may be, and you're like, oh, I want to write it. Let's say I want to write this game. I have an idea. I mean, 9 times out of 10, you're going to get to some point where you're just like, this is too hard. I mean, I'm speaking from experience. This isn't worth my time, or life gets in the way, and maybe, hey, I'll return to this project. This is my little side project. I'll come back to it. But doing a project where I had to finish, and it was a timeline, and I was getting paid, and if I didn't finish, like, there were ramifications, that was like the best thing that I've ever experienced as far as learning. And I did that a couple times. I just picked up freelance jobs that when I picked them up, I was like, I don't know if I could do this, but I'm just going to try. And, for me, it was like, it always worked out.
Yeah, I wouldn't do that as you're just starting out learning, but once you're
not just, if you're really newbie, yeah, I wouldn't do that. But
get to the point where you can build your own little mini games first, and then definitely like that. I think that's the next step. A lot of people wonder like, hey, what should I do? Like, especially if they're working full-time jobs too. They're not ready to make a big jump. I think it's a great idea to get contract jobs that are small like that. And I assume like with that project, like most of those kinds of projects, it was relatively simple gameplay wise. You didn't have to figure out how to make it fun, right?
It was so, and the whole game was decided up front. They just wanted me to do it.
That's what makes them great, because when you do a contract or when you work on a game like for a company, there's a lot of struggling to find the fun in things, right? And getting that right. When you're doing these little things that are going to kiosks and stuff, they have a design, they have a plan, they don't have the time or energy to go back and constantly modify things. So you have usually a pretty straightforward design that you just build to, which I like. Yeah.
And Jason made a good point in the chat. That's why game jams are so valuable, because it forces you to, throws you in a situation where you're going to come against problems that, you never would have expected.
Oh yeah, definitely. Game jams are a great way. Game jams, meetups, hackathon type things. And don't feel bad if you don't finish, right? Like, or if you fail, like you do them. Sometimes they're a great success and you win first prize and come home with a free VR headset or something. And sometimes you get last place because your idea didn't work out, like, or you came up with something and it totally didn't work out, so you just fell back to something else and it was terrible. Done all of the above,
I've got a couple questions on my end that I've been neglecting. Let me see if I could just address them. What is syntactic sugar? Syntactic sugar, I don't really know like a official definition, but and I'll want to get your input on this too, Jason. But I guess it's anything that takes like a language feature that's like really takes a long time to type, or it's very verbose, and it just cuts it down to like a simple shortcut, kind of like a language shortcut, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. It's like just like the string interpolation. Instead of doing string.format, open braces, quotes and the thing. You just do $ quotes and put your stuff right in there and inline it. It just shortens it up. Gets rid of all the extra verbose crap.
Yeah. Someone else says, why do you hate PHP? I'm collecting reasons since so many people seem to hate it. I don't like it just because I hate the syntax. I just don't like, I don't know.
I've never seen good PHP code is my problem. Like every line of PHP code I've seen has like SQL injection just sitting there ready. I mean, I'm sure there's good PHP code out there, but all the PHP code I've ever seen or written is terrible, not easy to maintain or manage, and just generally bad. Like I said, I'm sure somebody's good at it, but when I was doing PHP, everybody was a kid and we were all noobs and it was all terrible. So I kind of built up a giant aversion.
Just so hard to read. Like, I don't know, maybe this is my bias, but I feel like you could be the best PHP, programmer in the world. The code's still going to be hard to read.
Yeah.
Let me see what else we got.
Let me know if you run out. I got a couple over here too.
Okay. Student here. How do you know when to be using parentheses versus? Derek, if you could just give me some clarification on that question. I'm not 100% sure. I mean, it really just depends on the language feature you're using. Sorry. What else we got here? Do you think it's harder to get into gaming companies now than before?
No. It's way easier.
It's way easier to get in, but probably much harder to exist.
No, I don't think so. I think it's easier.
Oh, you think it is? Okay.
I mean, getting into game companies before meant like there were 100 companies and you had to go through that list. You had to get really good at C++, and you had to, it wasn't an easy thing to do. You couldn't just make, I mean, and I guess what now is relative, right? Like I'm thinking a decade ago, 2 decades ago, right? Like it was dramatically harder because building games was harder. You couldn't do it on your own unless you really knew a lot. There wasn't any type of good, there were a lot less resources out there, at least, right? There wasn't YouTube, there wasn't Udemy, there weren't millions of courses and resources out there to learn the stuff. And there's way less people hiring. The mobile boom kind of blew it up. Like the number of jobs available in the game industry is probably 100 times what it was, 10 years ago. Just from mobile alone, and then all the other stuff and all the business opportunities that are appearing now in game engines too. So
yeah,
I'm eating my Jelly Bellies, by the way. I just saw it pop up on the stream. I figured I needed a snack.
Yeah, I need to get up and grab one myself. But all right, you go for it. I think I've exhausted my questions for now.
Cool. Yeah, let me hit a couple. I'll scroll up here. Let's see. Mert asked, what do you guys think about unsafe stuff in C#? It's the new stuff. I don't know if you've seen it before. I don't use it a lot, but I have seen a use for it in networking. So, buddy Kyle built a really cool network layer. It uses the unsafe stuff to do basically networking without garbage allocation. So he can do 0 GC messages in and out and process everything. So I think that it's useful. There are some cases where it's going to make sense. It's probably makes more sense at that kind of a layer though, where you're doing it at a low level API or a thing that you're relying on. I wouldn't use it spread throughout your code everywhere. Yeah. Have you used it at all, Charles?
I haven't. I mean, I've read some things on it, and I mean, from my recollection, I remember reading it and thinking, "Oh, that's cool. I'll probably never use this."
I think that's what I thought too, and then I saw the network solution. I was like, "Oh, that makes a lot of sense. That's the use case. Like that's one where it's
it's a very specific use case."
Yeah. Let me see. There are a couple more. I'm trying not to miss any. How do you start designing a fairly complex framework? Do you have any tips?
Well, wait, how to create a framework
or how to design one? I don't know about you, but for me, like I only design a framework if it's something I'm going to use, and I design it for the use case that I'm using.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of frameworks, coming from a guy who's never created a framework, comes from I believe they're created pretty organically. I don't like the chicken before the egg thing. I think the problem comes and then someone solves it, and they solve it in such a generic way that not only do they solve it in such a generic way, but the problem itself is one that repeats itself so many times that, those two elements come together, and someone says, well, I should create a framework to solve this problem forever and ever. So I would say, as long as you've got a problem that you think needs solving and someone hasn't solved it with a framework, I would say pick out the things that I guess you would need to solve, the specific problems, write a high level idea of, the classes, the objects that, would be needed to solve that problem, and then just kind of lay it all out and figure out what your boundaries are, and, design it like that.
Yeah, usually what I've seen a lot is frameworks that are developed kind of pulled out of code. So like they'll build a game or a project and then think like, hey, we could really reuse this part of it, and then start refactoring it out and separating it into something that's a bit more reusable into a little package at first, and then, depending on the level, you call it a framework when it gets low enough level, I guess.
I guess a good example, now that I think about it, like if you think of that famous Ryan Hipple talk about scriptable objects.
Yep.
Hey, someone could, and I think a couple of frameworks have sprouted up in direct response to that video. You could look at all the things that he talked about, from game events to the way he used scriptable objects to encapsulate values. And you could say, well, that solves a problem in Unity specifically, so I could create a scriptable object framework. So in that case, I would say, hey, look at all the things that he talked about. There was game events. That's one aspect of your framework. There was the value holders. That's another aspect of your framework. There was runtime lists. That's another piece of your framework. You put that all together. You want to make sure that you have great documentation. You want to make sure that you have a solid test, set of tests behind it that people can run and can look at and see, hey, look, this is a very well-tested framework. I mean, I think half the battle of creating a framework isn't that it works, but there's also like a marketing aspect to the whole thing. You need to build confidence in your framework so that people can come across it and say, hey, look at the documentation. It's so well written. Look at the tests behind it. It's so robust. Those things are not only going to make your framework usable, but they're going to ensure that people will actually use it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you want to make it easy to use. Low friction, definitely.
Yes, low friction.
Yeah. Before I read another question, I just wanted to note that there's more viewers than likes. So I don't know if you guys got a chance to fix that problem.
Well, and I'm gonna like it.
Just begging for likes on it. I don't know. It does help get people to watch it though. I think YouTube and the more it gets likes, the more people watch it. So if there's anything interesting, just hit the button, I guess.
You're way better at this than I am.
Yeah.
I just
remember
think about that.
I was sitting here I started watching the analytics very recently. I didn't used to see it. Now I see it up here and I'm like, hey, those numbers, be better. But anyway, thank you guys.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. Appreciate you guys for joining. I know this was super impromptu, but this is great.
Somebody else asked another question. You mind if I read it?
Yeah, no, go for it.
Alan was saying, why do we not see coders creating and using DLLs? And I'll read this whole thing. It said, they help with code reuse and keeping the code clean. The DLLs could be made with intended purpose that it's not a single game or not for a single specific game. Do you use DLLs in your games?
I do. I mean, I say I use DLLs probably more professionally. For those of you who don't know, I'm not a professional game developer by day. I'm a game developer by night. But I mean, I see I see the definite value of creating DLLs.
Do you want to explain what they are real quick?
It's a good
people who haven't seen them.
Basically, a DLL is a library based. You take your code, and it's you package it up into this file. It's a .dll file, and then you can take that little package, little DLL, and you can pull it into any one of your projects in the future and reuse that code. So for instance, let's say you had a little math library, and you had a function, like you had a class that was it was math, and you had some methods like math.add, math.subtract, all sorts of things like that. You could take that and you can compile it into a DLL, and then you can pull that into any project you want, and you can reference that class, math.add, math.subtract, without having to rewrite the code and without actually having to pull in the individual class files into that project. So that's kind of the high level idea.
Yeah, they're just like your compiled code. Anyway, you were saying about you use them in. I know I use them a ton outside of game stuff. So you know, talk.
Yeah.
Feel free if you want to talk about those.
Yeah, I use them a ton outside of gaming stuff. I mean, you know, more recently for the company that I work for, we're working on taking a lot of our code base and putting an API in front of it. So what we've done in the recent months is take out the main classes, the core classes that kind of make up you know, our business logic and our business use case, and we've packaged that up into its own DLL that we've called the core DLL. And then, you know, so now we can use that in our API. You know, I create a C# project, a .NET project that's just a web API, and I pull in that DLL, and now I have access to all the classes that make up, you know, the fundamental objects that are, you know, my company's business is based on. So the same thing can be done for game development.
That's what the package manager does, actually.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Right, the Unity
exactly.
package manager.
Exactly. I think someone even asked about that recently. I don't know if it was in my chat or your chat about the
about using it.
Using it, what they thought about it.
So just to wrap up his question, though, the reason I don't see people using DLLs is, I think mostly because they don't want to have to go in and edit them separately. What I'm using now instead of I used to use them for library type stuff. What I use now is script assemblies. So script assemblies actually just does kind of the same thing. It makes it so that your game code builds out to DLLs, and it gives you projects kind of like you would have there. What I don't see myself doing a lot of, though, is having very reusable little chunks of code that I use from project to project. I know some people, like, it makes a lot of sense for their workflow, and they have those, right? I just never get into the case where I have two projects where I need things that are very, very similar, where I'm not going to need to change them dramatically enough. And I think it's just the nature of the types of projects that I'm working on. But I think if you work on a lot of the same kind of project, you probably do want to have a lot of DLLs, or at the very least asset packs. Probably DLLs going through a package manager that you're hosting yourself, though. So it'd be more like a local NuGet, or what's the Node version of that? I forgot the name of it.
NPM,
yeah.
Node Package Manager. I use because, you know, for my day job, it's a Java web application, so we use Maven. I set up a repository for my company that lives in AWS S3 bucket, so that's where our core library lives.
Yep, that's what I would go with too. Did you have more questions? I got more if you don't, if you want to hit one or two.
You go for it. I'll just read through them. I haven't read through them in a second.
Okay. Oh man, it scrolled, so I lost it. Probably, I have a real hard time. Like, the chat just goes by way faster than I can talk.
Oh, I see that.
I end up going on forever and ever because
Jason. Yeah, I know. Yeah, this thing is scrolling like crazy. Jason says DLLs have one big downside, as it is compiled code. Processor commands like checking Android platform with defines don't work in a DLL. Oh, that's good to know. Didn't even realize that.
Good point. I didn't even think about that. Oh, that's definitely a downside. You'd have to compile a separate version for each platform.
Thanks, Jason. We're gonna have you on as a guest next time.
Oh yeah, that'd be cool. So somebody asked, when making a game of your own, do you work out a plan beforehand, or do you just go with the flow and take the fun things and go? I like to prototype. I like to just heavily prototype the core mechanic and make sure that I like that, and then I'll build around that first. And if I don't like the core mechanic, I'll scrap it and try something else and keep iterating it either until it's good or until I find a different thing. That's the usual way I kick it off. I don't know. What do you do?
It depends. I mean, if I was being contracted by a company to create a game and they gave me like a loose idea, I think the first thing I do is try to write a functional specification